Clara Whitmore did not scream when they tied her hands. She did not beg when they pushed her up onto that wooden platform in front of half the town. She stood straight, chin lifted, eyes dry, while her brother Samuel stood in the back of the room and counted the money they were about to pay him for her. She looked directly at him, the only family she had left in this world, and he looked away first. That was the moment she understood. Nobody was coming to save her. She was completely alone. If you are watching this story for the first time, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now and follow this channel so you never miss a single story. And when you finish watching, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get back to Clara. The summer of 1884 sat heavy over Red Hollow, Montana territory, the way heat sits on a cast-iron skillet, dry and merciless and without apology. The kind of summer that made men short-tempered and decisions permanent. Elias Carter had ridden into town before sunup. He did not like towns. He did not like crowds or noise or the particular way people looked at a man who had chosen the mountains over society. He liked his cabin, his silence, his animals, and the clean, uncomplicated honesty of a wilderness that did not pretend to care about him. At least the wilderness was honest about what it was. He had a short list: flour, salt, lamp oil, rope. He figured 2 hours in Red Hollow, maybe 3, and he'd be headed back up the ridge before the afternoon got mean. He was wrong about that. He heard the crowd before he saw it, that low, ugly murmur that a gathered group of people makes when they have convinced themselves that what they are watching is not their problem. It was the sound of collective indifference. Elias had heard it before. He had heard it the day they buried his wife and son, and half the town showed up not to grieve, but to watch the way people watch a fire that isn't burning their house down. He told himself to keep walking. He told himself he was not in Red Hollow to get involved in other people's troubles. He had enough of his own. He had been carrying them for 6 years, and they had gotten heavier, not lighter, and he was not in any condition to pick up somebody else's weight on top of his own. He kept walking right up until he saw her. She was standing on a wooden platform outside the old courthouse, the kind of platform they used for livestock auctions, which was not an accident, because that was precisely what this was. Her wrists were bound in front of her with rough cord that had already left red marks on her skin. She was wearing a plain gray dress, practical, and worn the dress of a woman who worked for what she had. Her dark hair had come partially loose from its pins, probably from the struggle of being brought here against her will, and one strand of it crossed her cheek like a scar. She was not crying. That was the first thing Elias noticed. The second thing he noticed was that she was looking out at the crowd with an expression he recognized because he had worn it himself. That particular look a person gets when they have passed through shock and arrived somewhere much colder and much quieter on the other side of it. The look of someone who has just understood fully, and without any remaining illusions, exactly how alone they are. A man in a brown suit was speaking to the crowd. His name was Gerald Hatch, and Elias did not know him, but he knew the type, the kind of man who wore respectability like a costume, and used legal language to dress up things that had no business being legal. "The matter is straightforward," Hatch was saying, holding a folded paper in one hand. "The debt is documented and witnessed. The arrangement has been agreed upon by the woman's legal guardian, her brother Samuel Whitmore, who holds authority over her affairs following the death of their father. The woman will transfer to the custody of Mr. Aldrich Beaumont as settlement of the outstanding balance. Any party wishing to challenge the arrangement may do so in writing to the circuit court, which next convenes in her name." Hatch stopped. He looked around, uncertain where the voice had come from. "You're standing up there talking about her like she's a parcel of land," Elias said, stepping out of the edge of the crowd. "What's her name?" A ripple went through the crowd. People turned to look at him, a big man, trail dusty with 6 years of hard living written into his face and hands and the set of his jaw. Hatch frowned. "I beg your pardon." "Her name," Elias said again. "The woman on that platform. She's got one. Use it." From the platform, the woman looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were dark and steady, and she did not look grateful. She looked wary, the way a person looks when they have learned that strangers who insert themselves into your situation usually want something from it. "My name is Clara Whitmore," she said, and her voice was clear and level, which told Elias more about her character than anything else in that square. "And I did not agree to this. Clara didn't sign anything." A woman near the back of the crowd called out, then immediately went quiet when the man beside her grabbed her arm. Elias looked at the crowd. He looked at the faces, the farmers and the shopkeepers, and the women with their children, and the men who were watching with their arms crossed and their mouths shut, all of them understanding exactly what was happening, and none of them doing a single thing about it. "Where's the brother?" he said. A man stepped forward from near the courthouse door. Samuel Whitmore was a few years younger than Clara, with the particular look of a man who had spent a long time being charming, and had recently run out of charm to spend. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands were unsteady. He had the look of a gambling man who had burned down everything around him and was now trying to figure out how to walk out of the ashes without getting burned himself. "This is a private family matter," Samuel said. His voice was tight with something that was trying to sound like authority and landing considerably short. "The debt is real, and the arrangement is legal, and I'll thank you to stay out of it." "Legal," Elias said. He said the word the way you'd hold up a piece of food that smelled wrong. "You sold your sister." "I settled a debt." "You sold your sister," Elias said again, quieter this time, which was somehow worse. "With her standing right there, and half this town is watching it happen." He looked at the crowd again. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. "All right," he said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded leather wallet. Inside was every dollar he had, the money he had saved over the last 8 months, the money he had ridden into town to spend on supplies that would carry him through the winter. He had counted it that morning. He knew exactly what was there. He walked to the table where Hatch was standing with his papers and his official manner and his borrowed authority, and he laid the money down. "How much?" he said. It wasn't a question. Hatch blinked. The amount of the debt is..." "I didn't ask what the debt was. I asked how much to make this stop." He looked at the man called Aldrich Beaumont, who was standing to the right of the platform, a thick-necked man in expensive clothes with the particular stillness of someone accustomed to getting what he paid for. "What did you pay?" Beaumont stared at him. "This is not your affair, mountain man. I'm making it my affair." Elias did not raise his voice. He had learned in 6 years of living alone that a man who raises his voice is trying to convince someone. He wasn't trying to convince anyone. "Name the number." A long silence stretched across the square. Then Beaumont said a number. Elias looked at what was on the table. He looked at what was still in his wallet. He pulled out the rest and added it to the pile. It was almost exactly enough. It was close enough that Beaumont's jaw tightened. "Her debt is paid," Elias said. "Untie her." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Elias had heard since the mountain wind in January. Nobody moved. "I said untie her." One of Hatch's men looked at Beaumont. Beaumont looked at the money on the table. He was a man who understood money above all other things, and what he understood in that moment was that the transaction had been completed by someone other than himself, which was not what he wanted, but was legally exactly the same result. His jaw worked. He made a short, sharp gesture. The cord was cut. Clara stepped down from the platform without anyone's help. She moved to the edge of the square, rubbed her wrists briefly, and then stood very still looking at Elias with that same wary expression she had worn from the beginning. "I don't know you," she said. "No, ma'am." "You spent your winter supplies on a woman you've never spoken to." "Looks that way." "Why?" Elias considered that for a moment. The crowd was still watching. Samuel was still standing by the courthouse door, and the expression on his face was something Elias didn't have a word for. Shame, tangled up with resentment, tangled up with the desperate self-pity of a man who knew exactly what he had done and was already building the story that made it someone else's fault. "Because somebody had to," Elias said. Clara looked at him for a long moment. You want something in return? No, ma'am. Everyone wants something? Then I reckon I'm an unusual case. He picked up his hat from where he'd set it on the table. I've got a cabin up the ridge. You need a place to stay until you figure out your next steps. You're welcome to it. I'll sleep in the barn. No conditions. And if I say no, then you say no, and I ride out and that's that. He settled the hat on his head. But I don't imagine Red Hollow feels like home right now. Clara turned and looked at the crowd. At the women who had not spoken up. At the men who had not moved. At her brother who was still looking anywhere but at her. No, she said quietly. It doesn't. She turned back to Elias. Something in her expression shifted, not trust, not yet nothing so generous as that, but a small and cautious lowering of the walls just enough to let one person through. You'll sleep in the barn, she said. Yes, ma'am. And you'll tell me your name. Elias Carter. I'm Clara Whitmore. A pause. You already know that. I do. He gestured toward where his horse was tied. Whenever you're ready. She did not look back at Red Hollow as they rode out. Not once. Elias noticed that. He understood it in a way he couldn't have explained to anyone who hadn't done the same thing themselves, ridden away from a place that had shown you exactly what it was, and chosen not to give it the dignity of a final look. He had ridden away from his old life the same way 6 years ago. Eyes forward, jaw set. The particular silence of a person who has finished grieving one thing and hasn't yet found anything to grieve toward. They rode for 2 hours before Clara spoke again. How much did you spend? She asked. Enough. That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters. He kept his eyes on the trail. What's done is done. The number doesn't change what it was. She was quiet for a moment. I'll pay you back. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. Her voice was firm without being hard, the voice of a woman who had spent a long time making sure people understood the difference between what she chose and what she was forced into. I said I will. All right. Another silence. The trail wound upward through stands of pine, the air cooling as the elevation climbed. My brother, Clara said, and then stopped. Elias waited. He wasn't always like that, she said, and the way she said it, the particular flatness of it, the way she said it, like a fact she was still deciding whether to believe, told him everything he needed to know about how long she had been watching her brother become someone she didn't recognize. People change, he said. He changed the wrong direction. That happens. She looked at him sidelong. You're not very talkative. No, ma'am. Is that a mountain thing or a you thing? He thought about it. Both, I reckon. Something almost like a smile crossed her face. It was brief and careful, the smile of a person who had gotten out of the habit, but hadn't quite forgotten how. What happened to you? She asked. Up there in that cabin, what made you choose? She paused, searching for the right word. Alone. He was quiet for long enough that she probably thought he wasn't going to answer. I lost people, he said finally. Decided it was easier not to have people to lose. Easier, she repeated. She said it the same way he'd said legal, holding it up to the light to look at what it was actually made of. That's what I told myself, he said. The cabin came into view through the trees, sturdy and plain, and weathered, a place built for function rather than comfort, the kind of structure that had stopped caring about appearances a long time ago. A lean-to barn sat beside it. A vegetable garden along the south wall that had seen better years. A well with a rope that needed replacing. Clara looked at it all without comment. She climbed down from the horse before Elias could offer a hand, which he noted and respected. It's not much, he said. It's safe, she said. Right now, that's more than I had an hour ago. She turned and looked at him, standing in the last of the afternoon light, this quiet, weathered stranger who had spent his winter savings on a woman he'd never spoken to and asked for nothing in return. Why did you really do it? She asked again. Not suspicious this time, genuinely asking. Elias thought about the platform. About her face, that terrible stillness, that lifted chin, the dry eyes refusing to give the crowd what it wanted. About Samuel counting money while his sister stood in rope. About a time 6 years ago when someone should have stepped forward and didn't. "I know what it looks like," he said, "when somebody decides you're not worth saving." Clara held his gaze. "Thank you, Elias Carter," she said, quietly, like it meant something. "You're welcome, Miss Whitmore." He took the horses to the barn. She stood in the yard for a long moment, looking up at the mountains pressing close and silent all around her, and breathed in the kind of air that had no memory of Red Hollow in it at all. Then she turned and walked inside. The cabin was quiet, clean enough in the way of a man who lived practically rather than comfortably. A table, 2 chairs, a shelf of books which surprised her, a cold fireplace, a window facing east. She sat in one of the chairs and put her hands flat on the table and looked at them, the red marks on her wrists where the rope had been. Samuel had stood in that room and watched them tie her hands. Samuel, who she had cooked for after their father died, who she had sat up with through 3 separate bouts of fever, who she had covered for when debts started coming due buying time, writing letters, rearranging what little they had. Samuel, who she had believed right up until the moment she was standing on that platform, would eventually come to his senses. He had not come to his senses. He had come to the auction. She pressed her hands flat against the table and breathed slowly until the pressure behind her eyes retreated. She was not going to cry in a stranger's house. She was not going to fall apart in a place that wasn't hers. She was going to stay level and think clearly and figure out what came next, because nobody else was going to do that for her. She had land. That was something. Her father's land north of town, 60 acres with a creek running through it and timber worth money to the right buyer. The deed was in her name. Her father had been specific about that, back when Samuel's habits had started worrying him. But Samuel had taken the paperwork from the house before any of this started. She had noticed it missing 2 weeks ago. She had searched everywhere and then started to understand that it hadn't been misplaced. It had been removed, deliberately, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing and exactly why. She needed that paperwork. She needed a lawyer. She needed about 6 things she didn't currently have, and she was sitting in a mountain man's cabin with nothing but the clothes on her back and the rage keeping her spine straight. She heard Elias moving around in the barn, the low sounds of horses being settled for the night. She got up and started looking for where he kept his coffee. If she was going to plan a war, she was going to do it properly. She found the coffee. She found the pot. She found behind a tin of lard a small piece of paper with a list of names written in her brother's handwriting. Names she recognized, men in Red Hollow who had been present at that auction. Men connected to Aldrich Beaumont. And she stood there in the growing dark of an unfamiliar cabin and understood that whatever had happened today was not the end of this story. It was barely the beginning. Outside, the mountain wind came down off the ridge and moved through the pine trees with a sound like something exhaling after a long time, holding its breath. Clara Whitmore set the paper on the table, put the coffee on the fire, and began to think. The coffee was still warm when Elias came in from the barn. He stopped in the doorway when he saw the light. Clara had found his lamp and lit it, and she was sitting at his table with a piece of paper in front of her and an expression on her face that he recognized from his own mirror, back in the years when he still looked in mirrors. The expression of a person doing arithmetic on a problem that kept coming up short. She looked up when he came in. Her eyes dropped briefly to the paper, then back to him. "I found this behind your lard tin," she said. "I wasn't snooping. I was looking for your coffee." He came closer and looked at the paper. His face didn't change. "That's been there about 3 weeks. Man came through, wanted to trade it for a night's shelter and a meal. Said it might be worth something to the right person." "Do you know what it is?" "List of names," he said. "Didn't know what to make of it." "I do." She pressed her finger to the paper. "Gerald Hatch, Aldrich Beaumont, a man named Roy Cutter who works at the county clerk's office, and 2 others I don't recognize, but I know the handwriting." She paused. "It's Samuel's." Elias pulled out the other chair and sat down across from her. He looked at the list, then at her. "What does it mean?" he asked. "It means my brother didn't just sell me to pay a debt," Clara said. "He sold me as part of something bigger, something he was already in the middle of." She folded the paper carefully like it was breakable. "The land, Elias. My father's 60 acres. Samuel's been trying to move it since before the auction. But the deed is in my name. My father made sure of that." She looked up. He must have known. He must have seen what Samuel was becoming and made sure I'd have something Samuel couldn't touch. Except Samuel found a way to touch it anyway. He took the paperwork from the house, the deed, the survey, letters from the county, all of it gone. Her jaw tightened. If I can't prove I own it, Beaumont can file a competing claim and tie it up in court for years. By the time anyone sorts it out, he'll have stripped the timber, maybe the water rights, and I'll have nothing but legal fees and a verdict in a case I already lost in practice. Elias was quiet for a moment. "What's on that land worth fighting that hard for?" "Copper," she said. "There's copper under the north field. My father found signs of it the year before he died. He didn't tell many people." A pause. "He told Samuel." The word landed between them like something dropped from a height. Elias leaned back in his chair. "So Samuel knew what the land was worth?" "Yes. And instead of protecting it, he tried to sell me so he could sell it." Her voice stayed level. She was working hard to keep it that way, and he could see the effort in the slight tension around her mouth, the way her hands stayed flat on the table instead of moving. "He needed me out of the way. If I'm in someone else's legal custody, or if I'm simply—" She stopped, started again. "I was supposed to be gone." That's what the auction was, not just a debt payment. It was a removal. The lamp flame moved in some small draft from under the door. Elias looked at the woman across from him. This woman he had known for approximately 4 hours, who had been sold by her own brother that morning, and was now sitting in a stranger's cabin planning a counterattack with whatever she had left, which was one piece of paper and a clear head and a kind of fury. She was keeping carefully banked so it would burn longer. "You need the original deed," he said. "I need the original deed." Where would Samuel have put it? His room above the feed store. That's where he's been staying since things got difficult between us, and I asked him to leave the house. She looked at the paper again. Or he's already given it to Beaumont. If he'd already given it to Beaumont, Beaumont wouldn't have needed the auction, Elias said. He'd have just filed the claim. Clara looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, a small reassessment, quick and quiet, the kind a person makes when they realize the person they're talking to is sharper than they expected. "You're right," she said. "The deed is still somewhere Samuel controls. Otherwise, today doesn't make sense." "Then I need to get into his room." "You need someone to get into his room," Elias said. "You ride back into Red Hollow right now. Beaumont's men will be watching for you. He spent money today and he didn't get what he paid for. That makes him dangerous." Clara knew he was right. She didn't like that he was right, but she recognized the truth when it sat across a table and looked her in the eye. "Then what do I do?" she said, and the question cost her something. He could hear it, the particular difficulty of a capable person asking for help with something they'd rather handle alone. "Tonight," he said, "you sleep. Tomorrow I ride into town. You already spent everything you had on me." "I still have a reputation," he said. "People in Red Hollow don't know much about me, but what they know is that I'm not someone who creates problems. That might be worth something right now." She studied him. "Why are you doing this?" "You asked me that already." "You gave me an answer that sounded good," she said. "I'm asking for the real one." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, and the cabin settled around them with the small sounds old wood makes at night. "My wife's name was Margaret," he said. "My son was 4 years old. His name was Thomas, but he wouldn't answer to it. He'd only answer to Tommy, and only if you said it right." A pause. "There was a fire. I was supposed to be there, and I wasn't. I was making a house call 3 miles out because someone decided their convenience was more important than coming to me. He looked at his hands on the table. By the time I got back, there was nothing left to save. And for a long time I thought that meant I was done saving things, done trying. Because what was the point when you could do everything right and still lose everything? Clara didn't say anything. She waited. Then I walked into that square today, he said, and I saw your face, and I thought someone is standing right there, right in front of me, and I have the means to do something, and I am just standing here. He looked up. I wasn't going to be that man again. The silence after that was different from the silences before. It had weight to it. The particular weight of two people who have shown each other something real. I'm sorry about your family, Clara said, and she said it simply without decoration, because she was the kind of person who understood that some things don't need anything added to them. I'm sorry about your brother, he said with the same simplicity. She nodded once. So am I. She picked up her coffee cup. He got up and added a log to the fire, and they sat there in the cabin on the Montana Ridge, two people who had each lost too much, not talking about any of it anymore, which was its own kind of comfort. She fell asleep in the chair an hour later, her head against the wall, the piece of paper still in her hand. Elias took the extra blanket from his chest and put it over her without waking her. Then he went to the barn, the way he'd promised, lay down in the hay, and stared at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the horses breathe. He hadn't talked about Margaret and Tommy in 3 years, hadn't said their names out loud. It hadn't felt like tearing something open. It had felt strangely like setting something down. He wasn't sure what to do with that. He closed his eyes, and after a while, for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, he slept without dreaming about the fire. Clara was up before dawn. Elias came in from the barn to find her in the garden, not standing in it, but working in it, her sleeves pushed up, pulling dead growth away from the rows with efficient, practiced hands. She had found his tools in the lean-to and helped herself to them, which he noted without complaint. You don't have to do that, he said. I know. She didn't stop. My father had a kitchen garden. I know what I'm doing. He watched her work for a moment. She had a method. She wasn't just pulling randomly. She was reading the soil, identifying what was salvageable under the neglect. There's squash coming back under here, she said, not looking up. And your bean rows just need thinning. You've been letting things crowd each other out. I mostly just needed the garden to survive, he said. Didn't think much about thriving. She looked up at that, and something in her expression told him she heard the second meaning without him having to point at it. Go to town, she said. I'll be here. You'll be all right alone. She gave him a look that answered the question more clearly than words. He saddled up and rode down before the sun had cleared the ridge. Red Hollow in the early morning was a different animal from Red Hollow in the afternoon. Quieter, less performed. The town, showing its actual face before the day's business, gave everyone something to stand behind. Elias rode in slowly, which was his habit, and tied his horse outside the hardware store, which was also his habit, and waited for people to notice him and then pretend they hadn't, which was the particular dance of a man whose reputation preceded him into rooms. It didn't take long. The hardware man, whose name was Patterson, came out front under the pretense of sweeping his walk and said without looking directly at Elias, You made some people unhappy yesterday. I can live with that, Elias said. Beaumont's been asking around about you. What did you tell him? Nothing worth telling. Patterson swept a few strokes. He's not a man to let things go, Elias. Neither am I. He spent the next hour moving through town with the slow patience of a man who had nowhere urgent to be, which was how you gathered information without appearing to gather it. He stopped at the post office. He stopped at the barber. He drank a cup of coffee at the lunch counter and listened to 3 separate conversations happening around him without appearing to listen to any of them. What he learned was this: Samuel Whitmore had not gone home last night. He had gone to Beaumont's hotel and stayed there, which meant either Beaumont was keeping him close or Samuel was running to the only protection he thought he had left. Roy Cutter from the county clerk's office had been seen going in and out of the same hotel twice before 9 in the morning. And Gerald Hatch had sent a telegram the previous afternoon, nobody knew to where. But the telegraph operator had a particular look when you asked him about it, the look of a man who had been told not to discuss something and was finding that instruction difficult. None of that was good news. It meant the thing was moving faster than Clara had thought. They weren't waiting to see what she'd do next. They were already doing the next thing without her. Elias finished his coffee and went to find a lawyer. The only one in Red Hollow was a man named Theodore Marsh, who operated out of a narrow office above the dry goods store and had the look of a man who had once hoped for a more impressive career and had made his peace with things. He was honest, which was the main qualification, and he was afraid of Beaumont, which was the main complication. "Miss Whitmore has a valid claim," he said, after Elias laid out the situation in bare terms. He said it the way you say something when you're hoping the saying of it will be sufficient and you won't be expected to do anything further. "She needs someone to file on her behalf," Elias said, "before Cutter processes whatever Beaumont put in front of him." Marsh looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Carter, you understand the position this would put me in." "I understand what it would put Clara Whitmore in if nobody files," Elias said. "She loses 60 acres of copperland because the men who stole it from her got to the courthouse first. I have a practice to consider. I have—" "What do you have?" Elias asked, not unkindly. "Because I'm looking at a man who got into law because he believed in something. I'm wondering if that's still true." Marsh was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'd need the original deed." "I know where it is. If you obtain it through means that are—" "I'll get it through means that hold up," Elias said. "You focus on being ready to file the moment I hand it to you." He was back on his horse 20 minutes later, riding up the ridge, and he was thinking hard the entire way. The original deed was in Samuel's room above the feed store. Getting to it required either Samuel being absent from the room or Samuel giving it up voluntarily, and he trusted the second option approximately as far as he could throw the feed store itself, which meant he needed Clara. He needed Clara because the room was legally the property of a man who still had some form of guardianship claim over her under the current filing, which meant that Clara, and only Clara, had standing to be in that room looking through documents that pertained to her own family estate. It was thin. It was the kind of logic that worked better in principle than in practice, but it was what they had. He got back to the cabin and found her in the garden still, though she had moved on from the bean rows to something more ambitious involving the retaining stones along the south wall, which she had rearranged into an arrangement that was both more structurally sound and better looking than the original, though he suspected the improved appearance was incidental to her. She looked up when she heard his horse. "Tell me," she said. He told her. All of it, Cutter, and the hotel hatch, and the telegram Marsh, and his conditions. She listened without interrupting, which he was coming to understand was her particular way of taking things seriously. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, her hand still holding a piece of stone she'd been placing. "Samuel's at the hotel," she said. "Far as I know. Then his room is empty." She set the stone down. "And it's my family's documents in that room. My name is on those documents." "Clara, I know what you're going to say." She stood up, dusting her hands on her skirt. "You're going to say it's dangerous, and I should let you handle it." "I was going to say I'll go with you." She stopped. "You're not going in there alone," he said. "And I'm not going in there instead of you. It's your family's property. You should be the one to get it back." She looked at him for a moment with that expression she kept using on him, the one that was recalibrating quietly without making a thing of it. "All right," she said. "When?" "Tonight, after dark. Before Beaumont decides to move whatever's in that room to somewhere safer." She nodded. She went back to picking up her tools. "Elias," she said, not looking at him. "Yeah. The man who came through. The one who traded you that paper. What did he look like?" He thought about it. "Thin, young, had a black eye healing up on the left side, rode a brown horse with a white mark on the nose." Clara was still. "Did he give you a name?" "Said his name was Alden." She turned around. Her face had gone carefully neutral, which was starting to mean he was learning that something significant had just landed. "Alden is my cousin," she said. "My father's brother's boy. We haven't spoken in years. There was a falling out." She stopped. "He was at the house 2 months ago. I didn't let him in. I thought he was there to cause trouble." A pause. "He was trying to warn me." The thing about information was that it changed the shape of everything around it. Elias watched Clara understand that the piece of paper behind the lard tin was not an accident, not a random transaction, but a deliberate drop, a cousin she'd turned away from her door, trying to find another way to get her what she needed. "He's still out there," she said. "He found me," Elias said. "If he wanted to find you, he'd find you. Then why?" She stopped. "Figured it out. He didn't know if I'd trust him, after I turned him away. He needed to find someone I might actually listen to." "He found the right someone," Elias said. Clara pressed her hand briefly over her mouth, then lowered it. "I need to find Alden." "One thing at a time," Elias said. "Tonight we get the deed. Tomorrow we find your cousin." She nodded. She turned back to the garden. But her hands weren't quite steady anymore, and he pretended not to notice, because he knew what it looked like when someone was rearranging their understanding of the last several months in the space of 30 seconds, and that particular kind of reckoning deserved its privacy. They left after dark, riding easy down the ridge, not fast enough to attract attention. Red Hollow at night was quiet in the way of small towns that went to bed early and rose before light. All its industry paused, all its watching faces turned inward. The feed store was dark. The room above it was accessed by an outside stair at the back of the building. Elias had walked past it in the morning and noted the lock on the door, which was the kind that wasn't worth the metal it was cut from. Clara went up the stair first. He came behind her watching the alley, and she worked the lock with a hairpin from her pocket, with the confidence of a woman who had picked that particular lock before, which told him something about her and Samuel's history that he filed away without comment. The door opened. Inside a narrow room smelling of stale whiskey and unwashed laundry. Samuel's particular brand of chaos spread across every surface. Clothes on the floor, empty bottles lined up on the windowsill with the bleak optimism of a man who was keeping count of something. A saddlebag hanging on the bedpost. Clara went straight to the saddlebag. Elias watched the alley. He heard her moving the soft sounds of papers, the slight catch in her breath when she found something, and he kept his eyes on the dark below. "Got it," she said quietly. He turned. She was holding a folded packet of papers thick with documents tied with a piece of string. Her father's handwriting on the outside. Her name. The property description. Her hand was shaking. "Let's go," he said. She tucked the packet inside her coat, and they were back down the stair and into the dark alley in under a minute, moving without running, because running attracted attention, and Clara had enough self-possession to know that even now, even with her hands shaking and her heart going at twice its normal pace, running was the wrong choice. They were 2 blocks from the horses when Elias heard it. Footsteps, more than one person, coming from the direction of the hotel. He put his hand on Clara's arm, and they stepped back into the shadow of a doorway. 3 men came up the street. Beaumont's men. He recognized 2 of them from the auction. They were moving with the particular purpose of people who had a destination, not a patrol. They were heading for the feed store. Elias and Clara stood completely still in the shadow and watched them pass not 8 feet away. One of the men said, "Samuel better not have been stupid enough to leave it there." Another said, "Beaumont said bring everything. We cleaned the room out tonight." Then they were past, and their footsteps faded toward the feed store stair. Clara turned and looked at Elias in the dark. Her eyes were wide. The packet of papers was pressed against her chest under her coat. They had been 20 minutes ahead of a room being stripped. 20 minutes. He took her arm, and they moved. Not running. Walking fast the way you do when everything in you wants to run, and you won't let it win back to the horses and out of Red Hollow and up the ridge into the dark. They didn't speak until they were well clear of town. Then Clara said in a voice that was managing itself carefully, "He was going to let them take everything. Samuel, He was going to let them take the last thing my father ever left me. She wasn't crying. She was something past crying, the particular cold clarity that comes when betrayal finishes surprising you and just becomes a fact. He didn't even hesitate. Elias didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that she didn't already know. "The telegram Hatch sent yesterday," she said after a moment. "It wasn't to the county clerk." He looked at her. "It was to the circuit judge," she said. "Roy Cutter has someone in that office. I'd bet my life on it." She pulled the packet from inside her coat and held it in both hands. They were going to file a fraudulent claim before Marsh could file mine, and with the deed gone, there'd be nothing to challenge it. "But the deed isn't gone," Elias said. "No," Clara said. "It isn't." She looked down at her hands. The papers her father had written her name on. The land her father had made sure she'd keep. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "First thing, we go to Marsh." "First thing," he agreed. She pressed the packet back inside her coat close to her chest, and they rode the rest of the way up the ridge without speaking, just the horses breathing, and the dark trees pressing in, and the cold, clean Montana air that had no interest in any of their problems, and was therefore in that moment exactly the right company. Back at the cabin, she put the deed on the table. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked up at Elias, who was standing in the doorway with his hat in his hand, and she said something she clearly didn't say very often, because it came out with the slight formality of a word being used with full awareness of its weight. "I trust you," she said. "I want you to know that. I don't say that easily." "I know," he said. "I'm going to say it anyway." "All right." He went to the barn. She sat at the table with the deed and the list of names and a single lamp burning against the Montana dark, and she began with the careful precision of a woman who had grown up watching her father think through hard problems to plan exactly what she was going to do next. Outside somewhere down the ridge, a coyote called once and was answered. The night held its breath, and in the cold morning that was already beginning to form at the edges of the dark, something that had been set in motion by Samuel's greed, by Beaumont's hunger, by a mountain man who spent his last dollar on a woman he'd never met, was gathering itself toward a conclusion that none of the people who started it were going to be able to stop. Marsh was already at his desk when they arrived, which meant he hadn't slept much either. He looked at the deed for a long time without speaking. He turned it over. He checked the county seal. The recording marks the signature chain going back to the original land grant. He held it up to the window light the way a man checks a banknote he's not sure about, and then he set it down and folded his hands on top of it and looked at Clara across his desk with an expression that had moved from discomfort to something closer to resolve. "This is valid," he said. "I know it's valid," Clara said. "I need you to file it before Roy Cutter files whatever Beaumont put in front of him. Cutter won't be at the clerk's office until 8. What time is it now?" Marsh looked at his watch. 7:15. Clara looked at Elias. Elias looked at the door. "Then we have 45 minutes, she said, standing up. "How long does it take you to file?" "Clara, the process requires." "Theodore." She put both hands flat on his desk and leaned forward and looked at him with the particular directness of a woman who had run entirely out of patience for procedural hesitation. "My father built that land. He worked it for 30 years. He made sure it was mine because he knew Samuel would do exactly what Samuel has done. Men with guns went to clean out my brother's room last night. Whatever Beaumont filed is already in transit. I need you to move." Marsh picked up the deed. He stood up. He reached for his coat. "I'll need you to sign a representation authorization," he said, already moving toward the door. "Hand me the pen," Clara said. She signed it against the wall in the hallway, while Marsh was still putting on his coat, and they were down the stairs and moving up the street before the town was properly awake. The county clerk's office was a single room in the back of the territorial building, and when they got there, the front door was locked. Marsh knocked twice, then again with more authority. A young man Elias didn't recognize opened it. A deputy clerk barely 20, still blinking sleep out of his eyes. "Mr. Marsh," the boy said, surprised. I need to file an emergency claim protection on a land deed, Marsh said, holding up the papers. The property owner is present and consenting. This takes priority. The boy looked uncertain. Mr. Cutter isn't here yet, Marsh said pleasantly. You are, and you are perfectly authorized to accept a filing. Are you not? The boy was. He knew he was. He looked at the documents and then at Clara, and then at Elias, who was standing slightly behind Clara with the particular stillness of a man who was not threatening anyone and simply happened to be large and quiet and present. Yes, sir, the boy said. Come in. It took 11 minutes. Elias stood by the window and watched the street, while Marsh guided the young clerk through the recording process, Clara standing beside them, reading every word of every entry as it was made, because she was not a woman who signed things she hadn't read. At 7:42, the recording was stamped and entered, and the deed came back to Clara with the official mark of the Territorial Records Office on the outer page. At 7:53, Roy Cutter came through the front door. He stopped when he saw them. He was a small man with careful eyes, the kind of eyes that were always calculating something 3 moves ahead, and what they were calculating right now landed on his face in the form of a very controlled but very visible moment of understanding what had just happened. Gerald, he said, which was not Marsh's name, and then corrected himself. Theodore. What brings you in this early? Filing? Marsh said with the mildness of a man holding 4 aces. All taken care of. The Whitmore land claim is on the record as of 17 minutes ago. He smiled. Good morning, Roy. Cutter's eyes went to Clara, then to the deed in her hands, then back to the stamp on the record book which the boy had left open on the counter. I see, he said. I imagine you do, Clara said. He looked at her for a long moment with those calculating eyes, and what she saw in them was not anger, or not only anger, it was the specific expression of a man who has just watched an entire plan come apart and is already deciding how much of it he can credibly claim he had nothing to do with. Miss Whitmore, he said carefully, I was not aware you were in town. I wasn't, she said. And then I was. Funny how that works. Elias said nothing. He just stood there, which was sufficient. Cutter straightened his jacket, nodded to Marsh with the stiff courtesy of a man preserving appearances, and went to his desk and sat down and began looking at papers with great concentration. They left without hurrying. On the street, Marsh exhaled for the first time since they'd walked in. Well, he said. Thank you, Clara said. I mean that. Don't thank me yet. He tucked his copy of the filing into his coat. Beaumont is not going to let this rest. A recording is protection, but it's not resolution. He'll challenge it. Let him challenge it, Clara said. I'll be ready. Marsh looked at her and then at Elias and nodded once with the expression of a man who believed her. He went back to his office. Clara and Elias stood on the street in the early morning, and the town was waking up around them in its slow and unremarkable way. Horses and boots and the smell of breakfast fires, and nothing in it knew yet what had just happened in the back room of the Territorial building. Beaumont knows by now, Elias said. Or he will within the hour. Yes. He's going to come at you differently, not through Samuel anymore, through something harder. Clara folded the deed and put it inside her coat against her chest, the same place she'd carried it down the ridge in the dark. Then we need to find Alden before he does. I've been thinking about that, Elias said. Man came through my property once, knew where to find me, knew to trust me with something meant for you. He's not far. Where? There's a camp 2 miles north of my cabin up the East Fork. Trappers use it in season. Off-season it's empty, or it's supposed to be. He looked at her. If I were a man trying to stay close without being found, that's where I'd be. Clara looked north, the direction of nothing visible from where they stood. Tonight? Now, he said, before things move any faster. They rode out of Red Hollow without looking back, which was becoming their habit with that town. And this time Clara found it considerably easier. Alden Whitmore was exactly where Elias had thought he would be. He was sitting outside the trapper's camp with a tin cup in his hand, and the particular alertness of a man who had been listening to approach sounds for days. And when he saw Clara come through the trees ahead of Elias, he stood up so fast he spilled the cup and didn't notice. He was 24 years old. He had the same dark coloring as Clara, the same set to the jaw. He was thinner than he should have been, and the healing bruise around his left eye had gone yellow-green at the edges, which meant it was a week or so old. "Clara," he said. Just that. She pulled her horse up and looked at him for a long moment. She was thinking about the door she hadn't opened 2 months ago. He was thinking about the same thing. She could see it in the way he stood, not defensive, just braced the way you brace for something you've decided you deserve. "You tried to warn me," she said. "I tried," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't do it better. I'm sorry I waited as long as I did. I thought if I gathered more, had more to show you." He stopped. "I kept thinking I needed more time, and then you didn't have any more time. And that was my fault." Clara got down from her horse. She crossed to him, and she looked at him up close at the bruise and the hollow cheeks, and the careful way he was holding himself, like a man who had been absorbing consequences for a while. "Did Beaumont do that?" she said, gesturing at the eye. "His man Deacon," Alden said. "About 10 days ago. I'd been asking questions around the county clerk's office. Someone told Beaumont." He touched the bruise with 2 fingers, reflexive. "That was when I went to Mr. Carter's place. Knew I couldn't go to yours directly anymore." Elias had come up behind Clara, and he and Alden looked at each other with the brief mutual assessment of 2 men meeting for the first time after already being connected. "You did right," Elias said. Alden nodded. Then he looked back at Clara. "I have documents," he said. "That's what I've been trying to get to you. I've been collecting evidence for 6 months. Beaumont's been running this scheme across 4 counties. Your land isn't the only one. He finds properties with contested ownership or vulnerable heirs, and he moves in through the county clerk's offices. Roy Cutter is one of 3 clerks he's bought. The circuit judge is involved, not directly, but his clerk takes money." He went into the camp and came back with a canvas satchel that had clearly been buried at some point and dug back up, going by the state of it. "Deeds, financial records, letters I copied out by hand, statements from 2 other families he's done this to." Clara took the satchel. She opened it and looked inside, and then she looked up at Alden with an expression that was reconstructing itself in real time, the face of a woman who had come out here expecting a piece of the puzzle and had just been handed the whole picture. "This is enough," she said. "This is enough to go to the territorial governor." "That's what I thought," Alden said. "But I couldn't go alone. I didn't have standing. I needed someone whose name was on the land. I needed you." Clara closed the satchel. She held it in both hands. "You walked away from the family," she said. And she said it the way you examine a wound, not to open it wider, just to understand what you're working with. "When my father died, you and your father both, there was a disagreement about the estate," Alden said, and the flatness in his voice when he said it told her he wasn't going to pretend the disagreement had been trivial. "My father said things he didn't mean. Your father took them as things he did mean. And I was 20 years old, and I followed my father, and I have regretted it every year since. Your father died 3 years ago. It was just me." He paused. "I came back because it was the right thing to do. Not for anything, just because." Clara looked at him for a long time. Then she did something Elias didn't entirely expect. She reached out and put her hand on Alden's arm briefly, firmly. The kind of touch that isn't comfort and isn't forgiveness yet, but is the place those things start from. "We have a lot to talk about," she said. "But not here." They rode back to the cabin 3 across Alden, on a roan that had seen better years, and on the way Clara went through the satchel with one hand, while steering her horse with the other, reading in the saddle, with the focus of a woman doing triage. "Elias," she said after a while. "Yeah. There's a name in here I didn't expect." She held up a letter. "The circuit judge's clerk, the one Alden says takes money." "Who is it?" "A man named Hale, Edgar Hale." She paused. "He's also the man who certified my father's will." The three of them rode in silence for a moment while that settled. "If Hale's corrupted," Elias said slowly, "then anything he touched could be challenged," Clara said, "including the will itself, including the original recording of my father's deed." Her voice was steady, but he could hear what it was costing her. "They were planning farther back than I thought. This wasn't about Samuel's gambling debts. Samuel's gambling debts were just the opening they needed." Alden said quietly, "I think Beaumont approached Samuel 2 years ago, before your father died." Clara turned to look at him. "I think Samuel was in it early," Alden said. "I don't think it started as a betrayal. I think he was told he could have money, and he said yes, and then the thing grew, and by the time he understood what he was actually agreeing to, he was already in too deep to get out." "That's not an excuse," Clara said. "No," Alden said. "It isn't. I'm just telling you what I think happened." She turned back to the trail. "Why does it matter what happened?" "Because it matters when you decide what you want to do about him." Clara didn't answer that. They got back to the cabin late morning. Clara spread the contents of the satchel across the table, and Elias made coffee, and Alden ate 3 biscuits with the single-minded focus of a man who had been living on trapper's rations for 2 weeks, and they went through everything piece by piece. By the time they were done, the coffee was cold, and the afternoon was pressing through the window, and the picture was clear enough to be acted on. It was Elias who said what all 3 of them were thinking. "We can't go to the territorial marshal," he said. "Not yet. Beaumont's got people in the county. If we go to the wrong man, the documents disappear, and so does Alden." "The governor's office," Clara said. "Directly. Bypass the county entirely." "That means riding to Helena," Alden said. 4 days each way." "Unless we send the documents ahead," Elias said. "By courier. Someone Beaumont doesn't know and isn't watching." He looked at Alden. "You know the trapper camps between here and Helena?" "Most of them." "Can you move fast and stay out of sight?" Alden looked at the bruise on his face like he was reminding himself of the specific cost of being visible. "Yes," he said. "Then you carry the documents to Helena. Clara and I go to the county seat and file a formal complaint with the district recorder, make it public record that a complaint exists, so if anything happens to the documents in transit, there's already a record of the claim." Clara was looking at him. "You've done something like this before." "No," he said. "But I've thought clearly under pressure before. It's not so different." She almost smiled. "No," she said. "I don't suppose it is." They had 3 hours before dark to make a plan that covered as many possibilities as they could think of, and they used all 3 of them. And then the knock came at the door. Not a polite knock. The kind of knock that is a message in itself. Heavy, deliberate, the knock of someone who expects to be let in regardless of what the person inside decides. Elias was on his feet before the second knock. He went to the door and opened it without hesitation, because hesitating at your own door was a form of weakness you couldn't afford when the person on the other side already knew you were home. 2 men stood on the step. He didn't know them. They had the look of men who were employed for their size and their willingness, not their judgment. Behind them, sitting on a horse he hadn't bothered to tie because he didn't intend to be here long, was Aldrich Beaumont. He was older than Elias had registered at the auction, closer to 60 than 50, with the careful presentation of a man who had decided at some point that wealth was a costume and had been wearing it so long he'd forgotten what was underneath. His eyes were pale and precise, the eyes of someone who categorized things quickly and permanently. "Mr. Carter," he said. Not a question, an acknowledgement of research already done. "Beaumont," Elias said. "I'd like to speak with Miss Whitmore. She's busy." "I don't doubt it." He looked past Elias into the cabin, just a glance, but a thorough one, the kind that takes an inventory. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to make an offer." "She's heard your offers," Elias said. "She's not interested." "She hasn't heard this one." He shifted in the saddle. "May I speak to her directly, as a courtesy?" Clara appeared at Elias's shoulder. She had left the satchel on the table behind her, and she had put herself between it and the door, By instinct, a position that looked casual and was not. "Mr. Beaumont," she said. "Miss Whitmore." He looked at her with the evaluating calm of a man who has just rethought his approach. "I came to say that I believe we have started out badly, and that it would benefit both of us to reconsider our positions." "My position is the same as it was this morning," Clara said. "The land is mine. It's on the record. There's nothing to reconsider." "Everything is negotiable," he said. "I'm prepared to offer you a fair price, market value, cash." He paused. "The alternative is a legal process that will take years and cost you money you don't have." "The alternative," Clara said, "is that I take the documentation I have to the governor's office, and a man who has stolen land from 4 families across 3 counties stands in front of a territorial judge." She watched his face. "I know about the other families, Mr. Beaumont. I know about Roy Cutter. I know about Edgar Hale." Something moved behind his eyes, just briefly. Then it was controlled again. "You're making claims you can't support," he said, but his voice had changed. It was still smooth. It was slightly tighter. "Then you've got nothing to worry about," Clara said. "Come find me in court." The 2 big men on the step were very still. Beaumont looked at Elias. "You've made an enemy," he said. "I made a decision," Elias said. "Whatever that makes me is your business." Beaumont looked at Clara one more time. It was the look of a man reassessing a situation he had entered thinking it was already settled. The look of someone discovering that the door he expected to walk through had been bricked up while he was planning his speech. "Good day, Miss Whitmore," he said, and it was not a pleasantry. It was a statement of unfinished business. He turned his horse and rode out, his 2 men falling in behind him. Elias closed the door. He turned around. Clara was standing exactly where she'd been, one hand pressed flat to the table behind her, over the satchel, and Alden was on his feet across the room, looking at the door with the expression of a man who has just watched the thing he was afraid of arrive and leave simultaneously. "He knows we have something," Clara said. "He knew before he rode up," Elias said. "Cutter told him about the filing. He came to size up how much trouble we actually are." And now he knows," Elias said. Clara looked at the satchel. Then she looked at Alden. "You leave tonight," she said. "Not tomorrow, tonight." Alden nodded. He was already eating the last biscuit, which was its own kind of preparation. "Elias." She turned. "Beaumont is going to move the moment Alden is out of the county. He'll try to discredit the filing, discredit me, or find some pressure point we haven't thought of yet." "I know." "What pressure point haven't we thought of yet?" Elias looked at her. They said it at the same time. "Samuel." Samuel Whitmore was still at Beaumont's hotel. Samuel Whitmore was a man who had made a series of increasingly catastrophic choices and was now sitting in the wreckage of them, trying to decide whose side he was on, which was the wrong question. The right question was whose side could still protect him, and that calculation was shifting by the hour. "If Beaumont gets to Samuel first," Clara said, "he'll use him. As a witness, as a tool, as whatever he needs. Samuel will sign whatever they put in front of him if he thinks it keeps him safe." "Then we get to Samuel first," Elias said. "Samuel won't talk to me," Clara said. "Not now, not after this morning." She paused. "But he might talk to you." "Me," Elias said. "You're not me. He can't hate you the way he hates me right now. He hates me because I'm the proof of what he did." She looked at him steadily. "He might talk to a man who has no stake in his guilt, who doesn't need him to be sorry, who just needs him to answer one question." "What question?" "Whether he still has the letters between himself and Beaumont," she said. "The originals. The ones where Beaumont tells him what the plan is in writing before Samuel was in too deep to pretend he didn't know." Elias looked at her. "You think Samuel kept those letters?" "My brother is many things," Clara said, and the word brother came out worn and tired like a garment that had been washed too many times. "But he was always afraid. Afraid of being blamed. Afraid of being alone with consequences." She pressed her lips together. "He kept those letters as insurance. I know him. He kept them because he needed a way out if everything went wrong." "Everything has gone wrong," Elias said. Yes, she said. So he needs a way out. The afternoon was going. Alden was packing what little he had into a saddlebag. Outside, somewhere down the trail, the sound of Beaumont's horses had long since faded to nothing. Elias thought about Red Hollow, about the hotel, about Samuel Whitmore with his bloodshot eyes and his unsteady hands sitting inside Beaumont's protection, and slowly understanding that protection and captivity were not so different when the man offering them was Aldrich Beaumont. "I'll go tonight," he said. "After Alden leaves." "Be careful," Clara said. He looked at her. She said it simply without ceremony, the way you say something when you mean it more than you want to show. "I'll be careful," he said. Alden left at dusk, moving north through the trees on his tired roan, carrying the satchel, and 6 months of dangerous work toward Helena, and whatever justice looked like when it finally got moving. He and Clara said goodbye in the yard, with the particular efficiency of people who have too much feeling and too little time for it. "Don't get caught," she told him. "Don't get shot," he told her. Then he was gone into the dark. Elias saddled up an hour later. Clara stood in the doorway. "Samuel won't give them up easily," she said. "Even if he wants to." "I know. He's been protecting himself with those letters so long, he probably doesn't remember there's anything else worth protecting." "Then I'll remind him," Elias said. He rode down the ridge toward Red Hollow, with the cold Montana night pressing in from every side, and he thought about what Clara had said. I'll remind him, and what he planned to say to a man who had sold his sister and was now sitting in the dark, trying to figure out if there was any version of this story where he came out clean. There wasn't, but there was a version where he came out. And sometimes Elias had learned that was enough to work with. The lights of Red Hollow appeared below him in the valley, small and yellow and indifferent. He rode toward them. And in Beaumont's hotel on the second floor, a lamp burned in a room where Samuel Whitmore sat on the edge of a bed with a glass he hadn't touched, and a door he couldn't bring himself to open, trapped between the man whose money he'd taken and the sister he'd destroyed, and the night getting longer by the minute. The hotel was called the Territorial House, which was the kind of name that promised more than the building delivered. Elias tied his horse at the rail out front and stood for a moment on the boardwalk, reading the place the way you read terrain before you move through it. 2 men on chairs by the door, not guests, not staff. The particular stillness of men being paid to watch. One of them looked at Elias. Elias looked back at him until the man looked away, which told him what he needed to know about the quality of Beaumont's hired attention tonight. He went in through the front. The lobby was empty except for the desk clerk, a young man with the exhausted look of someone who had been answering questions he wasn't supposed to answer for going on 12 hours. He straightened when Elias came in. "I'm here to see Samuel Whitmore," Elias said. "Mr. Whitmore is a guest of Mr. Beaumont," the clerk said carefully. "He's not receiving visitors." "Does Mr. Whitmore know that?" Elias said. The clerk blinked. "Go tell him Elias Carter is in the lobby," Elias said. "Let him decide." The clerk went upstairs. Elias stood in the lobby and did not sit down, because sitting down in a place like this, when you didn't know what was coming through the doors, was the kind of comfort you paid for later. He heard voices upstairs, more than 2 people. Then footsteps on the stairs, and the clerk came back down alone. "Mr. Whitmore will see you," he said, with the slight surprise of a man who hadn't expected that answer. Room 6. Elias went up. The door to room 6 was open 2 inches, which was enough for a man inside to have seen the hallway before Elias knocked. He knocked anyway. "Come in," Samuel said. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, which is where Clara had known he would be, and the untouched glass was exactly where she'd predicted it would be, on the nightstand. Condensation ring underneath it, the drink of a man who needed the idea of a drink more than the drink itself. He was still wearing the same clothes from the auction. He looked smaller than he had in the square that morning, crumpled the way a piece of paper looks after you've balled it up and then tried to smooth it flat again. There was nobody else in the room, which was either a good sign or the kind of setup that looked like a good sign. Elias looked at the corners first. Closet door closed, window latched, no extra coats on the hooks. He was alone. "You came alone," Samuel said, and it wasn't quite a question. "Did you expect otherwise?" "I expected Clara to come herself." He said his sister's name with the specific exhaustion of a word he'd been turning over in his mouth all day, wearing it smooth. "Or to send someone to hurt me." "She sent me to talk," Elias said. He pulled the room's single chair away from the wall and sat down in it, facing Samuel close enough that they were having a conversation far enough that nobody felt cornered. "She's not interested in hurting you." Samuel laughed a short and ugly sound. "That's generous, given what I did." "She's a generous woman," Elias said. "More than you deserve right now. She knows that. She's choosing it anyway." Samuel looked at him. "Why are you here truly?" "Because you have letters," Elias said. "Letters from Beaumont, written before the auction, before any of this became public. Letters where he tells you what he wants and what he's going to give you for it. Letters where you're not the man who chose to do a terrible thing. You're the man who got pulled into something and ended up doing it anyway." He paused. "You kept them because you knew you might need them." Samuel's jaw worked. He looked at the glass he wasn't drinking. "You know a lot about what I have," he said. "Clara knows you," Elias said. "She knows how you think. She's known you your whole life." He let that sit for a moment. "That's the thing about people who love you. They know you better than you know yourself sometimes, including the parts you're not proud of." "She doesn't love me anymore," Samuel said. "Not after this." "I don't know about that," Elias said honestly. "But what I know is that she's not trying to destroy you. She's trying to survive what you did to her. Those are different things." Samuel put his face in his hands. He stayed like that for a while. Elias let him, because rushing a man through the particular shame of understanding what he'd actually done was how you got half measures and locked doors. When Samuel lifted his head, his eyes were red, not crying, the redness of a man who was past the point of tears and into something raw. "Beaumont approached me 2 years ago," he said. "Before Father died. He made it sound like a business arrangement, said the land had mineral value, and he wanted to develop it, and he'd cut me in for 30%. He stopped. "I knew Father would never agree. He wanted to keep the land, leave it to Clara. He never trusted development men." Something crossed his face that might have been grief if it hadn't been so thoroughly curdled by other things. "So I said yes without telling him. And then Father died, and the land went to Clara the way he always planned. And Beaumont said the deal was still on, but we had to work around Clara." A pause. "I told myself it would be fine, that she'd get fair compensation eventually, that I'd make sure of it. I told myself a lot of things. And then it got harder to stop," Elias said. "It got impossible to stop." Samuel's voice dropped. He knew. Beaumont, he'd documented every conversation we had, every agreement. If I walked away, he'd take it all to the sheriff, and I'd be the only one standing there with evidence against me because Beaumont covers himself, and he covers himself thoroughly. He looked at Elias. "The auction wasn't my idea. I want you to know that." "It was your sister on that platform," Elias said. Not angry, just clear. "I know." The word came out broken. "I know what it was. I knew it then. I stood there and I told myself it was temporary, that I'd get her out of it, that—" He stopped. "I didn't get her out of it. You got her out of it. A man who never met her in his life walked into that room and did what her own brother should have done." The silence in the room was the kind that had weight to it, not comfortable, but honest. "The letters," Elias said after a while. Samuel reached under the mattress. He pulled out an envelope, thick folded once. He held it in both hands and looked at it the way you look at something you've been carrying so long, the shape of it is worn into your palms. "There are 11 letters," he said. "The first 8 are from before Father died. They establish the original arrangement. The last 3 are from after the auction was set. They're in Beaumont's handwriting signed. He uses careful language, but the meaning is clear." He turned the envelope over. "Roy Cutter is named in 3 of them, Hatch in 5. The circuit judge's clerk Hale, he's referenced twice by initial only, But combined with what he stopped reconsidered. Combined with what Clara must have found, it's enough. Will you testify? Elias said. Samuel looked up. When this gets in front of a judge, Elias said, will you stand up and say what you just told me? The question sat between them, and Samuel looked at it from every angle. Beaumont will bury me, he said. Beaumont's going to be buried, Elias said. The question is whether you're under him or beside him when it happens. Another long silence. Clara, Samuel said. She won't forgive me. Maybe not right away, Elias said. Maybe not for a long time. Maybe not all the way. He looked at the man across from him, this ruined, frightened, broken-down version of someone's brother. But she'll know you did the right thing at the end. That's worth something, Samuel. It's not everything, but it's something. Samuel closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked older, but he also looked just slightly, just barely like a man who had located something he thought he'd lost. He held out the envelope. Get her the land back, he said. Promise me that. That's already done, Elias said. The deed's filed, the record's made. He took the envelope. What we're working on now is making sure it stays done. He stood up. Samuel said, tell her, and then stopped. Tell her yourself, Elias said. When you're ready, when you've earned it. He left the room. He left Samuel sitting on the edge of that bed with the untouched glass and the understanding of what he'd just given away and what he'd just gotten back, which was something that didn't have a name, but was slightly closer to being a person he could stand to be. Elias went down the stairs and through the lobby and out into the street. He was 2 buildings from the hotel when a hand came out of the dark and grabbed his arm. He turned fast, his free hand already moving, and stopped. The man was big, wide-shouldered, with a face that had been rearranged more than once in its life. But his hands were open, and he was stepping back, showing both palms in the universal language of not starting something. Easy, the man said. I'm not Beaumont's. Then who are you? Elias said. Name's Cole Deacon. He paused. I'm the man who hit your boy's cousin in the eye 10 days ago. Elias said nothing. He waited. I work for Beaumont, Deacon said. I have for 3 years. I do what he pays me to do, and I haven't thought too hard about what that means. He looked at his open hands, then back up at Elias. Tonight he told me to follow you when you left the hotel. See what you were carrying. If it was what he thought, take it. Elias felt the envelope in his coat. Why are you telling me this instead of doing it? He said. Deacon was quiet for a moment. That kid with the busted eye, he said. When I hit him, he went down and he stayed down, and while he was down, he said something. He paused. He said, I'm just trying to get the papers to his cousin before they take everything she has. That was all. He wasn't even angry. He was just sad. Like it was the most important thing he'd ever done, and I was going to stop it. His jaw moved. I've done a lot of work for Beaumont. I've moved a lot of men out of the way. But I hit a 24-year-old kid for trying to save his cousin's land, and when I walked away that night, He stopped. I didn't feel right about it. I haven't felt right about it since. Elias looked at him for a long moment. What do you want? He said. Nothing from you, Deacon said. I'm not looking for a deal. I'm just... He looked down the empty street. There's another man coming. Beaumont sent 2 of us. The other one went around the back of the hotel to cut off your horse if you ran. Elias felt the cold settle over him. His name's Reardon, Deacon said. He doesn't have my hesitations. How much time do I have? Maybe 3 minutes. He'll figure out I'm not coming back to him, and then he'll come to me. Can you keep him busy? Long enough, Deacon said. Long enough for you to get clear. Elias looked at this man, this large, honest, deeply uncomfortable man, who had done bad work for a bad employer and was now standing in an alley at night, trying to be something else, and was doing it imperfectly and without any expectation of credit, which was usually how real things happened. You're going to be in trouble with Beaumont, Elias said. I know it. He finds out you let me go. I know, Deacon said again. I'll manage it. You get going. Elias took 2 steps, then turned back. Come to the territorial hearing when it's called, he said. What you know about Beaumont's operations, you come and say it. Deacon looked at him. You want to feel right about something, Elias said. That's the thing. He didn't wait for an answer. He went around the north side of the hotel, away from where Reardon was waiting, came at his horse from the opposite direction, untied it in one smooth motion, and was moving before anyone on the street had time to register his direction. He didn't run the horse. Running attracted attention, and he needed to be unremarkable right now, just a man riding out of Red Hollow after dark, which was unusual but not impossible. He was clear of town in 4 minutes. He rode up the ridge in the dark with the envelope against his chest, and Deacon's words in his head, and the particular alertness of a man who has just left a situation that could have gone several different ways, and has not yet fully processed which way it actually went. The cabin was lit when he got back. Clara was at the table. She had the deed in front of her, and she had been writing a long document in her careful hand, organized and precise, and she looked up when he came through the door with the expression of a woman who had spent 2 hours not pacing and was glad to have something to stop not pacing for. She saw his face. You got them, she said. He pulled out the envelope and set it on the table in front of her. She picked it up. She held it for a moment without opening it, the way you hold something when you're preparing yourself for what's inside. Then she opened it. She read in silence. He poured himself a cup of the coffee she'd kept warm and stood by the fire and let her read because some things needed to be processed without an audience, even when you weren't alone. When she finished, she set the letters down very carefully and looked at the wall for a moment. He was in it from before Father died, she said. Yes. He sat at the table at Christmas, she said. He sat at Father's table, and he shook Father's hand, and he was already talking to Beaumont. She pressed one hand flat on the letters. I keep thinking I've reached the bottom of it. And then there's more floor. I know, he said. She looked up. Samuel gave these to you voluntarily. He did. Is he going to testify? Elias looked at her steadily. I believe so, when it comes to it. She absorbed that. Then she picked up the letters again and set them beside her own document and sat back and looked at the full weight of what they had assembled. Elias. She said his name the way you say the name of a person you've been thinking about while they were gone. There's something you should know. While you were in town. He waited. A woman came here, she said. Walked up the ridge on foot. Her name is Anna Pratt. She owns 20 acres south of here, or she did before Beaumont moved on her 6 months ago. She heard about the filing this morning. Word travels faster than we thought. She looked at the document she'd been writing. She's not the only one. There are at least 2 other families. I've been writing down everything she told me. How did she know to come here? Elias said. Deacon, Clara said. He stared at her. Cole Deacon, she said. He apparently told Anna Pratt before Beaumont sent him to follow you tonight that if things broke the way he thought they might, there was a cabin up the North Ridge where someone was finally fighting back. She paused. He was already choosing before he talked to you. Elias thought about the man in the alley with his open hands and his uncomfortable conscience, and the way he'd said, I didn't feel right about it, like the feelings of a man who hits people for money deserved to be honored, and somehow in the telling of it, they had. He's going to need somewhere to land, when Beaumont figures out what he did, Elias said. Then he can come here too, Clara said, without hesitation. The way she said it told him something about who she was, not the woman from the platform, not the woman in the stranger's cabin, but the woman underneath all of it. The woman who had existed before any of this, who had always been capable of exactly this. Clara, he said. She looked at him. This is going to get harder before it gets easier, he said. When Beaumont realizes Alden is on the road to Helena, when he realizes Samuel talked, he's going to come at the cabin directly. I know. We need to be ready for that. I know that too. She looked at the letters that deed her own careful pages of documentation. What I need is 3 days. Alden needs 3 days to get the documents to Helena and get a response moving back. If we can hold Beaumont off for 3 days, 3 days, Elias said. He thought about the cabin, the ridge, the approaches, the single trail up from the valley. He thought about what he had and what he didn't have. He thought about Deacon, who was a man who might yet prove useful. I can do 3 days. She looked at him. I know these mountains, he said. Beaumont's men don't. That matters more than numbers. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, when this is over, you should start accepting patients again. The shift in direction was so complete that he actually took a step back. I know about the medicine, she said. Anna Pratt told me. She said her husband came to you 2 winters ago with a bad lung and you turned him away. She wasn't angry about it, she said he understood. But she said, before your family died, you were the best healer in 3 counties. People don't always recover, he said, even when you do everything right. I know that, she said. You know that too, you just forgot for a while that knowing it doesn't mean you should stop trying. She looked at him the way she'd looked at the deed, with the careful attention of someone reading something important. You ran up here to stop feeling things. And it worked. And it also cost you everything it cost you. She paused. You're not running anymore. I'd hate for you to go back to it just because this is over. He didn't have anything to say to that. He stood in his own cabin in the firelight and didn't have a single word available to him, which was uncommon. I'm sorry, she said. That was too much. No, he said. You're right. He sat down across from her. You're right, and I don't know what to do with it yet, but you're right. She nodded once. She turned back to the letters. Help me organize these, she said. By date. I want to build the timeline cleanly. He pulled his chair close to the table, and they worked side by side through the night, organizing 11 letters and 20 acres worth of Anna Pratt's testimony, and Clara's deed, and all the pieces of Alden's canvas satchel that she'd copied before he left, building the clean and inarguable account of what Aldrich Beaumont had done and how long he had been doing it. Somewhere around 2 a.m, she fell asleep at the table again, her head on her arm, her hand still holding a letter. He took it from her fingers carefully. He put the blanket around her again. He sat up until dawn, keeping the fire, reading through what they'd built together and thinking about whether 3 days was enough and what he was going to do if it wasn't. The first day passed quietly, which was the kind of quiet that has a sound of its own. 2 more people came up the ridge. A man named Burton, who farmed east of town, and his eldest daughter, who did his accounting and had the same sharp-eyed quality. Clara had the quality of a woman who had been doing the real work while the men around her got the credit and was done pretending otherwise. They brought their own documentation. They stayed. The cabin, which had been empty for 6 years, was becoming something else. Elias noticed it the way you notice a season changing, not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of small changes. The sounds of other people. Boots on the porch. Clara's voice explaining something to Burton's daughter at the table. The smell of food being cooked for more than 2. The particular domestic noise of a space being used. He noticed he didn't mind it. On the second day, Cole Deacon arrived at dawn. He came alone on foot, leading his horse, and he looked like a man who had spent the night being followed and had spent considerable effort making sure he wasn't anymore. He had a split in his lip that hadn't been there 2 nights ago. Beaumont, Elias said. Reardon, Deacon said. When he figured out I let you go, we came to an understanding. He touched the lip. He came out worse. Where's Reardon now? Heading south last I saw. He took his horse and his pay, and he decided the odds had shifted enough that staying was no longer worth it. Elias looked at him. And Beaumont? Furious. Deacon said it without expression. He knows Samuel talked. He knows the letters are gone. He's been on the telegraph all morning. His jaw tightened. He's sending for someone. Someone he says he uses when things need to be resolved and he can't use local men anymore. How long? Elias said. 1.5 days, Deacon said. Maybe 2 days if the telegraph was slow. Elias did the math. Alden needed 3 days. They had maybe 2. Does this someone have a name? He said. Beaumont calls him Greer, Deacon said. I've never seen him, but I've heard men who have." He paused. "He's not a man who talks first," Elias told Clara. She listened without interrupting, which he'd come to understand as her way of letting information settle before she responded to it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Burton's daughter, whose name was May, and at Deacon, and at the room that had become over 2 days something resembling a council. "We can't wait for Alden," she said. "We need to change the calculation before Greer arrives." "How?" May said. "We make it public," Clara said. "All of it, today." She looked at Elias. "If the story is already in the open, if Red Hollow knows what Beaumont has done and who helped him, then Greer arriving doesn't fix anything. It just makes Beaumont look like a man sending someone to silence people who have already spoken." "The town didn't exactly distinguish itself at the auction," Elias said carefully. "The town didn't know the whole story at the auction," Clara said. "The town thought it was one woman and her brother's debt. That's a small story. A private story." She straightened. "What we have now is not a private story. This is 4 families. This is a county clerk and a judge's office, and documented fraud going back 2 years. She paused. "That's a town story. And Red Hollow, whatever else it is, does not like finding out it has been made a fool of by a man who thought it was too small to notice." "You want to go to Red Hollow," Elias said. "I want to go to Red Hollow today," she said. "All of us. In public. And I want to say what Beaumont did clearly enough and simply enough that every person in that town understands it before nightfall." Nobody said anything for a moment. Then May Burton said, "I'll go." "So will I," said her father. Deacon said, "If I stand up in that town and say what I know, there's no going back for me." "There's already no going back," Clara said, not unkindly. "You made that choice in the alley 2 nights ago. I'm just asking you to finish it." He looked at her for a long time with those complicated eyes, a man calculating the last remaining angles of a life that had run out of comfortable options. "All right," he said. They rode into Red Hollow 5, across which was not subtle and was not meant to be. Clara was in front. She rode into the center of the main street, and she stopped, and she waited, which was all you had to do in a town that size to generate an audience. People came out of shops and off porches and paused on their way to wherever they were going, and within 10 minutes there were 40 people standing in the street, and within 20 minutes there were closer to 60, and Theodore Marsh came out of his office upstairs and stood on the landing above the dry goods store, looking down at all of it. Gerald Hatch pushed through the crowd from the direction of the hotel, and behind him, moving slower, Aldrich Beaumont himself. Beaumont looked at the 5 of them in the street. He looked at Deacon. Something happened in his face that he controlled almost immediately, but not quite fast enough. "Miss Whitmore," he said from the edge of the crowd, "this is neither the time nor the—" "Mr. Beaumont has been acquiring land across 4 counties through fraud," Clara said. She said it simply and clearly, and at a volume the whole crowd could hear. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. "He has bribed county clerks, including Roy Cutter, who is at his desk right now. He has paid money to the office of the circuit judge through a man named Edgar Hale. He has used my brother's debt and my brother's fear to attempt to steal 60 acres of copper land that belongs to my family." She held up the stack of documents. "I have the letters. I have the deed. I have the testimony of 4 families across 3 counties. I have a former employee of Mr. Beaumont who is willing to speak to what he witnessed." She looked at Beaumont directly. "All of this is on its way to the governor's office in Helena as of yesterday morning." The crowd was very still. Beaumont looked at the documents in her hand. He looked at Deacon. He looked at Burton and May, and finally at Elias, who had not said a word, and was simply sitting on his horse behind Clara with the quiet presence of a man who had nothing to prove and nowhere else to be. "This woman is making accusations she cannot support," Beaumont said, turning to the crowd. His voice was practiced and confident. "The filing she made is being contested. The documents she claims to have are real," said Theodore Marsh from the landing above. Everyone looked up at him. He looked embarrassed and resolved simultaneously which was the expression of a man doing something uncomfortable because it was right. I have reviewed them. They are valid. The recording is valid. The claim is valid. He looked at Beaumont. And I have sent my own affidavit to Helena by this morning's post. The crowd shifted. It was a small movement, a physical adjustment, a turning of bodies, but it meant everything. The moment a crowd stops belonging to the person speaking and starts making up its own mind. Beaumont felt it. Elias could see him feel it in the slight adjustment of his posture, the recalculation behind his eyes. And then Roy Cutter came pushing through the crowd from the direction of the territorial building, and his face was the face of a man whose morning had already gone badly and was about to go worse, and behind him, 3 men. Elias didn't recognize wearing the dust of a long ride and the territorial marshal's badge. Alden, Elias thought. Alden was faster than they thought. One of the marshals stepped forward. He had a folded paper in his hand that he held up for the crowd to see. I'm looking for Aldrich Beaumont, he said. The crowd parted. Beaumont stood in the center of it alone in the way that men stand alone when the thing they've built around themselves falls down, and the marshal walked toward him with the particular unhurried authority of a man who has done this before and is not interested in drama, only in completion. Clara watched it happen from the back of her horse. She watched them take Beaumont's arm. She watched Hatch step backward into the crowd and then stop when the second marshal looked at him. She watched Roy Cutter stand very still with the expression of a man deciding how cooperative to be, and then begin talking to the third marshal with the speed of someone who had made that decision quickly. She did not feel triumphant. She had expected to feel triumphant, and she didn't. She felt the particular exhaustion of a long fight arriving at its end. Not emptiness, not satisfaction exactly, but the absence of the weight she'd been carrying, which was its own strange sensation, like setting down something so heavy you'd forgotten what your arms felt without it. Elias pulled his horse alongside hers. He didn't say anything. He just rode up beside her and was there, which was what she needed. My brother, she said quietly. He'll have to answer for what he did, Elias said. But he gave us the letters. The marshal will know that. She nodded. Clara. His voice was low enough that only she could hear it over the noise of the crowd. What you did today, we did today, she said. He was quiet for a moment. What we did today. I've been in these mountains 6 years telling myself that keeping to myself was the smart choice, that caring about things was the thing that cost you. He looked at her. I was wrong about that. She looked at him. I know you were wrong about that, she said. I just needed you to know it too. May Burton let out a long breath somewhere behind them. Her father put a hand on her shoulder. Deacon sat on his horse and stared at Beaumont being walked toward the marshal's transport and had the expression of a man watching a thing he was partly responsible for get taken apart and finding it not uncomplicated, but something like relief. Around them, Red Hollow did what small towns do in the wake of something that changes everything. It talked, it argued, it clustered into groups and then broke apart and regrouped. It processed out loud. The collective realization that what had happened in its square 2 days ago had not been a simple debt transaction, but the visible tip of a much larger theft that most of them had not seen coming. Some of them were ashamed. Some were angry. Some were already telling the story in the version where they had known something was wrong. None of that mattered much to Clara. What mattered was the deed in her coat, the land her father had kept for her, the ground that still existed 60 acres of copper country north of town, unchanged by everything that had been done to steal it. What mattered was that she was still standing. And what mattered, the thing she was only beginning to let herself understand, was the man riding beside her in the morning light of a town that had finally turned the right direction. This quiet stranger who had spent his last dollar on a woman he'd never met and had not once in all the days since asked for anything in return. She reached over and put her hand briefly on his arm. He looked at her. Thank you, she said. Just those 2 words, the same words she'd said the first night, but they meant entirely different things now. You did this, he said. We did this, she said. He put his hand over hers for a moment. Brief. Solid. The gesture of a man who had spent 6 years keeping his hands to himself and had decided at least in this small way to stop. Then they both turned back to the street and the work that was still ahead of them and the beginning of whatever came next. The marshals took Beaumont and Hatch out of Red Hollow that same afternoon, and Roy Cutter went with them in the particular manner of a man who had decided that cooperating fully and immediately was his best remaining option. He talked the entire ride to the county seat, which was exactly what the marshals had expected, and exactly what Clara had counted on when she'd said, "Make it public," because a man like Cutter, stripped of the protection he'd been sold, defaulted immediately to self-preservation, and self-preservation meant naming names, and names meant the case assembled itself faster than Beaumont's remaining allies could dismantle it. Edgar Hale, the judge's clerk, resigned by telegram before sundown. The circuit judge himself sent a letter to the territorial governor's office the following morning. A careful, lawyerly letter full of passive constructions and strategic distance, making clear that he had been unaware of the full extent of his clerk's activities and was fully prepared to cooperate with any review. Theodore Marsh read the letter and described it to Clara as the most elegant act of preemptive self-removal he had seen in 20 years of practice, which Clara received without comment. Samuel was taken into custody the same evening the marshals arrived, not by force, but by his own feet. He walked into the marshal's temporary office above the feed store and said he wanted to make a statement, and the deputy who took it said afterward that Samuel Whitmore had spoken for 2 hours without stopping, which was either profound guilt or profound relief, or the way those two things look identical when they finally get out. Clara did not go to see him, not that day and not the day after. She sat with that choice, the way you sit with something that doesn't resolve itself quickly, not avoiding it, not making it smaller than it was, just giving it the space that hard things require before they become clear. Elias didn't push her on it. He understood in the particular way of someone who had spent years with their own unresolved weight. That the question of Samuel was not a question with a quick answer, and that the woman sitting across his table in the mornings drinking his coffee and organizing the last pieces of documentation that the territorial recorder still needed was working through something that couldn't be rushed without being broken. The cabin held more people than it had been built for, and it was better for it. May Burton came every morning and left every evening, riding up the ridge from her father's place with the regularity of someone who had found a purpose and was not about to let poor trail conditions interfere with it. She had taken over the coordination of what had become, almost without anyone formally deciding it, a documentation effort collecting the testimony of every family Beaumont had moved against, organizing it, preparing it in the form that Marsh said the territorial proceeding would require. She had her father's head for numbers, and her own sharp instinct for the places where a story didn't quite add up, and she caught 2 inconsistencies in the records that Alden's satchel hadn't covered, which mattered more than anyone had expected. Alden came back from Helena on the 5th day thinner than when he'd left, and moving with the careful gait of a man whose roan had gone lame 20 miles out and finished the journey at a walk. He came through the cabin door and sat down in the nearest chair and accepted the coffee Clara put in front of him without speaking for a full 3 minutes. Then he said, "The governor's office is moving. They've already sent letters to the county courts. There's going to be a full territorial proceeding, not just Beaumont, the whole network." He looked at his cousin. "They said they've been watching Beaumont for 2 years, but didn't have enough to move on. What we sent them was enough." 2 years, Clara said. 2 years, Alden said. That's how long this kind of man operates when nobody with standing decides to fight. Nobody at the table said anything for a moment. They were all in their various ways thinking about 2 years, about how many things had happened in 2 years, about their father's last Christmas, which had occurred inside those 2 years while Beaumont was already making plans. "He's going to have the best lawyers in the territory," Clara said, not as a worry, just as a fact she was cataloging. "He is," Alden said. "But he's also going to have his own letters read into the record. And Cutter's testimony. And Deacon's." He paused. "And Samuel's." Clara was quiet. "Samuel's statement is very detailed," Alden said carefully. "The deputy let me see the summary. He didn't hold anything back." "I know," she said. "Clara, I know," she said again. Quietly. Final in the way that words become final when a person has said them to themselves enough times that saying them out loud is just the last step. Elias watched her from across the table. He'd learned in the weeks since the auction to read the difference between the silences Clara used to hold people at a distance and the silences she used to hold herself together. This was the second kind. He left it alone. The territorial proceeding was set for 6 weeks out, which gave everyone time to prepare, and also gave everyone time to feel the particular stretched wire tension of waiting for something important that you cannot speed up. Marsh filed 3 more motions in the interim. May organized the testimony of 7 families across 4 counties. Deacon gave his statement to a deputy marshal and came back to the cabin afterward, looking hollowed out in the way of a man who has said everything and is now waiting to find out what it costs him. "How are you feeling?" Clara asked him. "Strange," he said. "Like I took off a coat I've been wearing so long I forgot it was a coat." She looked at him. "What kind of coat?" He thought about it. "The kind that keeps you warm, but makes everyone around you cold," he said. She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "I know that kind." He became a regular presence at the cabin after that. Not a permanent resident, he had a boarding house room in town, but the kind of presence that shows up most days and makes himself useful and gradually stops being a guest and starts being part of the particular fabric of a place. He fixed the well rope on the 3rd week without being asked. He rebuilt the lean-to roof after a hard rain in the 4th week again, without being asked, working alongside Elias with the wordless efficiency of 2 men who understood physical labor as a form of conversation. It was May Burton who noticed first. "Your cabin has become the place people come," she said to Elias one morning over the papers spread across his table. "Seems so," he said. "Does that bother you?" He thought about it honestly. 6 weeks ago it would have, he said. She looked at him with the bright, assessing quality she had, this young woman who saw things clearly and was not afraid of what she saw. What changed? He was about to say something general, something about circumstances or time, and then he looked at Clara across the room, who was explaining something to Alden with her hands moving the way they moved when she was working something out, and he said simply, "Someone showed me what it actually looked like, having people around." May followed his gaze. She smiled in the small, knowing way of a person confirming something they'd already understood. She went back to her papers. Clara looked up from across the room and caught him looking. She raised her eyebrows slightly, the expression of a woman who knows she's being discussed and is deciding how she feels about it. He held her gaze. She looked back down at her work, but she was almost smiling. It was the 4th week when she finally went to see Samuel. She went alone. She told Elias where she was going, and she did not ask him to come, and he understood the distinction and stayed. Samuel was being held at the county seat 20 miles south. She made the ride in the morning and arrived at the holding facility, which was a sturdy brick building with a deputy at the door and the smell of institutions everywhere, and she told the deputy her name, and he let her in without requiring explanation, which meant Samuel had told them she might come. He was waiting in a small room with a table and 2 chairs and a barred window. And when she came in, he stood up, which was the first thing she registered, that he stood up the way he had been taught to stand when a woman entered a room. This automatic courtesy, persisting even here, even now, even between the 2 of them. She sat down. He sat down. They looked at each other. "You look better than I thought you would," she said finally. "Lower bar than usual," he said. It was almost their old rhythm, the dry back and forth they'd had as children, the language of siblings who understood each other's humor even when they were angry. It hurt more than she'd expected hearing it here. "I read the summary of your statement," she said. "I figured you would." "You told them everything?" "Yes." He looked at the table. "I should have told someone everything 2 years ago. I should have. There were 100 moments where I could have stopped it. I know that." "You know I'm not here to tell you that," she said. "You know that already. Then why are you here?" She thought about it. She had thought about it for 4 weeks, which was how she knew it was true. "Because you're my brother," she said. "And because what you did was the worst thing anyone has ever done to me. And because both of those things are true at the same time, and I'm trying to figure out how to carry them both." She paused. "I'm not here to forgive you. I'm not ready for that. I don't know if I'll get there. And I'm not going to promise you something I can't guarantee." Samuel's jaw worked. He nodded and kept nodding slightly, the way people nod when they're absorbing something painful, and the nodding is just what the body does to keep itself from stopping. "I'm here," she said, "because Father would have wanted me to come. Not for you, for me. Because he always said that the things you refuse to face get heavier, not lighter, and I have been carrying enough heavy things. Clara." His voice was rough. "What I did to you was unforgivable," she said simply. "Maybe. I don't know yet, but I know that I am going to be all right." She said it the way you say something you've tested thoroughly and found to be true. "I have land that's mine. I have people who showed up. I am going to be all right, Samuel, in a way that has nothing to do with whether you're sorry." He pressed his hand over his eyes. His shoulders moved once. "The testimony you gave will help the other families," she said. "The Burtons, Anna Pratt, 4 other families across the county. Your statement is part of what makes this case solid." She paused. "That matters. Not to clear you, but it matters." He lowered his hand. His eyes were wet, and he didn't try to hide it. "Is there anything?" he started. "Not now," she said. "Maybe later. I don't know what later looks like yet." She stood up. "I'll come back, when I'm ready. I don't know when that is." She extended her hand. He looked at it for a moment, like it was something he didn't trust himself to interpret correctly. Then he stood and he took it, and she shook his hand the way you shake the hand of someone you are choosing carefully and without full certainty not to be finished with. She rode back up the valley, and she arrived at the cabin at dusk, and Elias was on the porch with 2 cups of coffee, like he'd heard her coming from a mile out, which he probably had. She sat on the step and took the cup, and they sat in the cooling evening for a while, without saying anything. "How was he?" Elias said finally. "Broken," she said, "and trying to do the right thing from inside the broken." He nodded. "I didn't forgive him," she said. "I know. I might someday. I don't know." "That's honest," he said. She looked at the mountains, the ridgeline going dark against a sky that hadn't quite given up on the day yet. "He stood up when I walked in," she said. "All the way in there in that room. He stood up." Elias looked at her profile. "That's not enough," she said. "But it's something." "Yeah," he said. "It is." She drank her coffee. He drank his. The first stars came out above the ridge, small and unhurried. "Elias," she said. "Yeah. I want to start the copper survey next spring, properly, with a licensed assayer." She paused. "If the mineral rights hold the way my father believed the land has enough value to build something real, not just hold on to it, build something." What kind of something? She had been thinking about this. He could tell she had been thinking about it for a while, the way Clara thought about things she cared about quietly, thoroughly, until the shape of it was clear enough to say out loud. "A proper settlement," she said. "On the North Acres. Not a farm. A town eventually. Or the beginning of one." She turned to look at him. "The families Beaumont moved against, they need somewhere stable. Somewhere with legitimate title and room to build. If the copper produces what my father thought it would, there's enough to fund infrastructure, a school, a medical station." He looked at her. "You could run the medical station," she said. He was quiet. "That's not a casual suggestion," she said. "I've thought about it seriously. The county has 1 doctor, and he's in Red Hollow, and he's 70 years old, and he drinks. There are people between here and Helena who ride 2 days for care. They should be able to get in an hour." She paused. "You know how to do that. You did it for years. The reason you stopped is that you were in pain, not that the work was wrong." He set his cup down on the step. He looked at his hands. I let people down, he said. My family. Your family died in a fire, she said clearly, and without softness, but also without cruelty, because she had learned that soft wasn't always kind. You weren't there. You have believed for 6 years that not being there makes you responsible for what happened. But you were not there because you were helping someone else. Which is the thing you do. Which is who you are. She held his gaze. You have been punishing yourself for being exactly the person you are. The night had settled fully around them, the kind of dark that felt protective rather than threatening. He said, I'm afraid. I know, she said. Me too. He looked at her. Of what? Of building something I could lose again, she said. Of caring about something that much. She looked at the cabin, its lit window, the sounds of Alden and May's voices from inside, where they'd stayed late working on the final documentation. And then I think about the alternative. Which is this? She gestured at the space between them, but smaller, safer, and alone. She shook her head. I've been alone. I thought I preferred it. I was wrong. He was looking at her with the full weight of his attention, which was a particular thing, that attention. It didn't roam, it didn't perform, it just landed and stayed. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I want to be clear about that. Whatever this is, whatever it becomes. I'm not the kind of person who... She stopped. I don't run from things I've decided on. I know that about you, he said. Then you know that when I say I want you to run the medical station, she said, and the ghost of something warm was in her voice. I mean, I want you to be there, for the long version, not the convenient one. He was quiet for a long moment. The stars were properly out now, thick across the Montana sky, the way they get at altitude in the fall, not decorative, just present, doing what they do without making a thing of it. I haven't treated a patient in 6 years, he said. I know. I'm going to be rusty. People in this county are not in a position to be particular about rusty, she said. Something moved across his face that had been a stranger to it for a very long time. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the thing that came before a smile in people who had forgotten how. All right, he said. She looked at him. All right, all right. He picked up his coffee cup. The medical station, the spring survey, the settlement. He looked at her sidelong. The long version. She breathed out slowly, the particular exhalation of someone who has been holding their breath without realizing it. Good, she said. The territorial proceeding happened on a Thursday in late October, and it lasted 3 days. Beaumont's lawyers were, as predicted, the best available. They argued procedural grounds and questioned the chain of custody of the letters and submitted 4 character witnesses who had clearly been coached to the point of glazed uniformity. The letters themselves, however, were letters, and they said what they said, and 11 letters in a man's own handwriting are difficult to argue around, no matter how skilled your counsel. Cutter testified for 4 hours on the first day. Deacon testified for 2 hours on the second. May Burton presented the organized family testimonies with the precision of someone who had spent 6 weeks making sure every number was right. And when the opposing counsel tried to rattle her, she looked at him with the expression of a woman who had survived worse and continued speaking. Clara testified last. She sat in that chair in the territorial courtroom, and she answered every question put to her, and the questions that were designed to confuse her, or diminish her, or make her seem like a woman acting out of personal grievance, rather than legitimate claim. She answered those with particular care, not defensively, but with the patience of someone who knew the record and was content to let it speak. She was on the stand for 3 hours. When she stepped down, Elias was in the second row of the gallery, and he watched her walk back to her seat, with the same quality of movement she'd had on that platform in Red Hollow 4 months ago. Chin-level, eyes forward, the particular dignity of a person who is not performing steadiness, but actually has it. She sat down beside him. Well, she said quietly. You were extraordinary, he said. She looked at the floor for a moment. I was terrified, she said. I know, he said. That's what makes it extraordinary. The verdict came on the afternoon of the 3rd day. Beaumont was found liable on 11 counts of land fraud across 4 counties. Cutter lost his position and was prohibited from public office. Hale resigned preemptively, and the circuit judge's court was referred for review. The 4 other families who had brought claims had their cases expedited for settlement. The Whitmore land claim was affirmed without qualification. The land was hers. It had always been hers. But now the record said so in a way that could not be quietly removed by a man with access to the county clerk's office. And that was the version of hers that mattered. Samuel was sentenced separately 2 weeks later. The judge considered his cooperation and his early testimony and sentenced him to 18 months rather than the 5 years the charge carried. It was less than it might have been and more than nothing, which was the particular territory of consequences for men who did terrible things and then helped undo them. Clara stood in the back of the sentencing hearing and watched her brother receive the sentence and did not cry and did not feel the particular dark satisfaction she had been afraid she might feel. She felt instead something much simpler and much harder to name, the sense of a chapter closing, not cleanly, not without damage, but closing. She left before the room emptied. She didn't want to see him let out. Outside the courthouse, Elias was waiting. He had gotten into the habit of being in the places she arrived, which she had gotten into the habit of not commenting on, because commenting on it would require her to define it, and she wasn't ready to do that in words yet. What she knew was that when she came out of difficult rooms, he was there, and that this had come to feel less like an arrangement and more like a fact of the world, the kind of fact that rearranges itself around you so gradually you only notice it when you try to imagine the absence. "Done?" he said. "Done," she said. He fell into step beside her. They walked down the courthouse steps and into the fall afternoon, and neither of them said anything for a while, just walked the way people walk when the walking itself is the thing they need. "I want to go home," she said. He looked at her. Red hollow. She shook her head. "The cabin," she said. He didn't say anything, but she felt him change slightly beside her, a settling, a loosening of something, and she understood that this was not a small thing she had said, and that he understood it wasn't small, and that neither of them was going to make a production of it. They rode home in the late afternoon light, the mountains going gold and red in the fall, the air carrying the first real cold of the season. The cabin had changed, not dramatically. It was still the same structure, still Elias's place in its bones, but it had the quality of a space that has been lived in with intention. Clara's order in the shelves. Alden's extra boots by the door, because he'd been staying the last 2 weeks to help with the survey preparation. The garden along the south wall, which Clara had rebuilt from the ground up over the summer, and which had produced more than twice what the neglected original ever had. The stack of medical references on the side table books Elias had ordered from the bookseller in Helena, arriving in groups of 2 or 3 over the past month, which he read at night with the focused attention of a man who has decided to remember something he set aside. He had seen 3 patients already, quietly, without announcement. Anna Pratt's youngest with a chest cold that needed watching. A man from Burton's farm with a hand injury from a fence repair. A woman who had been riding the ridge trail and took a bad fall and needed stitching. Each one had been in its way a return, not painless, not the easy reclamation of something set down and picked back up without consequence. The first time he opened his medical bag, the same bag he'd closed 6 years ago and put in the back of the barn, he'd stood there for a full minute, not doing anything, his hands on the buckles working through whatever needed to be worked through. Clara had been in the doorway. She hadn't said anything. She had just been there. Which was, he had come to understand one of her particular gifts, the ability to be present in a way that didn't require you to perform your feelings for an audience. He opened the bag. The world did not end. The grief was there, and then it was something he was carrying, rather than something carrying him, which was the only transformation that was actually available to people who had lost what he'd lost. And it was, he had decided enough. On the evening they came back from the sentencing, Alden made dinner an unexpectedly good beef stew that he claimed was an accident, and May stayed, and they sat around the table the way they had been sitting around it for months now. And the conversation moved through the things that needed talking about, and then through the things that were just worth saying, and outside the Montana night settled in around the cabin with the particular solidity of early winter. After May left and Alden went to sleep on his cot in the corner, Clara and Elias sat by the fire. She had her feet up on the other chair, which she had not done in the early weeks, and did now, without thinking, which told its own story. "Next spring," she said. "Yeah. The assayer comes in April. If the copper reads the way Father thought, we can start the land survey for the settlement in May." She paused. "I was thinking we'd call it Whitmore, but I keep coming back to the feeling that naming a town after yourself is the wrong energy." "What would you call it?" he said. She thought about it. "Carter's Ridge," she said. He looked at her. "You were the first one up here," she said. "You cleared the land. You built the cabin." She paused. "And you were the one who decided that this," she gestured, encompassing the room, the people who had passed through it, the whole strange accumulation of months, was worth protecting. "You did that," he said. "I just made room." "Making room was everything," she said. He looked at the fire. "Carter's Ridge," he said, trying it out. Then quietly, "Margaret would have liked that." She looked at him. "Tell me about her," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Not the old quiet, not the closed quiet of a man protecting himself, but the quiet of someone gathering something carefully. "She was smarter than me," he said, "which she never let me forget." A pause. "She used to sit exactly where you're sitting, same way, feet up. She could read 3 books in the time it took me to finish one, and she'd already forgotten more of it than I'd taken in." He looked at the chair. She would have been furious about all of this. What happened in town? She would have gone in there herself on the first day, and I'd have spent the whole time trying to keep her from doing something drastic. Clara almost smiled. "She sounds like someone I would have liked." "You'd have been trouble together," he said. And there was grief in his voice, but not only grief, there was something else in it. Something new. The particular quality of a memory that has been through the fire and come out changed, but not destroyed. "Tommy," she said. "What was he like?" "Loud," Elias said without hesitation. "He was so loud. I don't know how a 4-year-old human being can produce that much noise." Something moved across his face that was real and unguarded. "He used to run at me when I came home, full speed, like he was trying to knock me down, which he couldn't. He was 40 pounds, but he'd hit me at the knees, and I'd go down anyway, because that's what you do." He stopped. "I'd give most things to go down like that one more time." Clara didn't say anything. She looked at him steadily and let him be in it. "They were good people," he said finally. "Both of them. They deserved more time." "Yes," she said. "They did." The fire settled. "I'm glad you stayed," she said. "After the cabin, after the auction. I'm glad you didn't just hand me the coffee and go back to your solitude." "I didn't have much to go back to," he said. "That's not why you stayed," she said. He looked at her. "You stayed because you're not the man you'd been pretending to be for 6 years," she said. "The closed-off mountain man who didn't want anything. That's not you. That was you in pain." She paused. "I just happened to be the thing that reminded you." He was quiet for a long moment. "You happen to be a lot of things," he said. She looked at him with those dark, steady eyes. "Clara?" He said her name simply, without ceremony. "I am not good at—" He stopped, tried again. "I have been on my own a long time. I am going to do this imperfectly." "I know that," she said. "I'm going to be too quiet sometimes. I'm going to go up the ridge by myself and not explain why. I'm going to—" "Elias," she said. "Yeah, I know who you are," she said. "I've been watching you for 4 months. I know who you are." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking you to be different. I'm asking you to be here." He looked at her. "Can you do that?" she said. "Yes," he said, without hesitation, without the long pause that would have meant uncertainty. Just yes, flat and final and fully meant. She nodded once. "Good," she said. She put her feet down and stood up and said goodnight and went to her room. Her room, the room that had been his and had quietly become hers over the course of the summer without either of them formally discussing the transition, and he sat by the fire for a while longer. He thought about Red Hollow, about a wooden platform and a woman with her chin up and her eyes dry, refusing to give the crowd the satisfaction of her breaking, about the weight of his wallet going empty on a table and not feeling like loss. He thought about Tommy hitting him at the knees. He thought about the medical bag open on the table, the first patient's hand stitched and wrapped, the child's chest listened to and prescribed for, the small, ordinary, essential acts of care that he had been made to do and had stopped doing and was beginning again. He thought about Carter's Ridge. He thought about what it meant that a woman who had been sold by her own brother and lost everything and rebuilt everything was sitting by his fire saying, "I'm not asking you to be different. I'm asking you to be here." He thought about what it meant that he had said yes. Outside, the first snow of the year had begun. He could hear it, not see it, just hear the change in the way sound moved, the particular muffled quality that snow brings the world going quieter and more careful. He got up and put another log on the fire. He checked the door. He picked up the medical book from the side table and read for an hour in the warmth of his own home, which was full of sleeping people and pending plans, and the lived-in particular mess of a place that has stopped being a retreat and become a life. The woman her brother had tried to destroy was asleep down the hall. The man who had spent 6 years becoming smaller to avoid further pain was slowly and imperfectly and with full knowledge of what it cost becoming larger again. They had found each other in the worst possible circumstances, which turned out to be the only circumstances that could have produced exactly this: two people worn down to what was actually real in them, with no performance left and no patience for pretending, building something honest out of what remained. The snow fell. The fire held. And in the Montana mountains, in a cabin that had once belonged only to a man who had given up on belonging anywhere, the life that neither of them had planned was well and truly underway, not because fate had arranged it, not because they had been saved by luck, but because on a summer morning in Red Hollow, a man had decided that someone was worth stepping forward for, and a woman had decided that a stranger's decency was worth trusting. And those two decisions, made by two frightened and stubborn and deeply human people, had changed everything. That was the whole of it. That was enough.